Hello, everyone, and welcome to this edition of AgileDad University. I'm Lee Henson, and today we're here to talk about a topic that's very near and dear to my heart. We're going to talk about the art of agile estimating and forecasting. We've got so many exciting things going on. We're just so glad that you could be here. This is going to be about an hour, and welcome to this edition. I wanted to make sure that you all have an hour reserved or thereabout. If we do finish a few minutes early, we'll make sure that we get out a few minutes early and call it good there. So with that being said, let's get started. So for those of you who haven't met me before, I've been president and founder of AgileDad since 2007. We officially went on the books in 2012. We do lots of exciting things for the community. We've got lots of webinars that are previously broadcast that we have recorded that are available on AgileDad.com. We've got high quality training and things available. Just want to let you know who we were in case you never heard of us. It's a pleasure to meet you. We do have a bunch of upcoming free webinars, so I wanted to make sure you're aware. On June 22nd, we have the Agile Meeting Playbook. This is a brand new playbook. It's a definitive guide to all the different Agile meetings, so that's going to be something that's super cool. On July 8th, it looks like we're going to have, or July 6th, sorry, we're going to have Exploring Team John. This is a really cool topic for me. This is how to handle in-sprint interruptions and how to handle those kind of things. And finally, on July 20th, we'll have the Agile 12-step program. And then, of course, on August 3rd, everyone's been asking for the executive review. So we definitely are going to have that executive review. So with that being said, this session is being recorded. So for those of you who won't have a chance to watch it live, you can show your peers, and we'll be certain to have that up on our YouTube channel as well as on our AgileDad channel. So there you go. Lots of classes coming up as well. Just wanted to make sure you're aware so that way you could stay in the loop. For those of you who missed the previous three, I thought I'd show you what the previous three webinars were real quick. The first one we did was on using the force, the 5 Scrum values, exploring those and understanding those and getting our head around those. Then we did one that was wildly popular, 7 Deadly Sins of Technical Debt. And then finally, 9 powerful ways to keep your team members motivated and to keep people highly energized. So those are the 3 that we did. They're 100% free, and they're available for 100% free for you and for all your team members to review. So you can take a look at those. Also, we have a podcast called The Daily Stand-Up. If you haven't heard about that, make sure you ping us at learnmore@agiledad.com, or you can look it up. It's on iTunes, iHeartRadio, it's on TuneIn. Anywhere where you get your podcast, Apple Podcasts, that podcast is available. And every day it's 10 minutes or less. It's a shot in the arm to teach you about an Agile topic. So all last week we covered the Agile meetings, and this week we're going to continue that theme and finish out talking about each of the Agile meetings and what you need to know. So for this session, we're going to cover the following 9 topics. So we're going to talk about why you should never use time to estimate, who's responsible for sizing and forecasting, what's a story point and why does it matter and why is it useful to you, how to forecast without using time, can you achieve 85% estimation accuracy? Good question. What are initial estimates and why do they matter? Should we resize work at any time as we make discovery? And when does the estimate finally stand? And then finally, how do I explain this to my leadership team? How do I get them all on board to let them know, hey, this is what we need to be doing? So as always, I've turned it into a comic book. Go figure. It's just one of those things where I thought, you know, when you turn it into a comic, it's easier for people to consume. All the illustrations were done by my daughter, so I appreciate that. So let's get started. So right out of the gate, why should you never estimate using time? The truth is, time-based estimates have 2 things in common. They're always time-based and they're consistently wrong. Now, this isn't a shot across the bow for all you people who believe firmly in time-based estimates or for all your people with the PMP certification. What we're trying to say here is that I like to use an example of people painting a room. So if I had a whole crew of people painting a room, and each person came in with different skill sets and different tools. So the first person had a professional paint crew. They've been painting for a number of years, and they were very good at what they did. It would take them no time to paint a simple wall. Where if someone had minimal paint at home experience, and they had a roller, traditional roller, and they had the blue tape, and they got everything taped off, you know, it might take them, you know, a little more time, but still they do a fantastic job. Where if I maybe had someone who had never painted before and they were using one of those paint by number brushes from a coloring book with a small palette, it might take them forever. And then finally, you have someone who's artistic that just wants to throw the bucket of paint on the wall and call it art. You know, I'm not here to say one's right and one's wrong, but what I am here to say is that they would all come in with different estimates. So here in the example that I give here on a screen, The gentleman comes in and says, "Hello, sir. I'm in the market for a shirt, size 10 hours. Any color will do." If we went into a store and tried to reasonably order a piece of clothing and asked for it to be a specific size, but we didn't use size as a metric, we used something different as a metric. So if we used, instead of size, if we just said a time, give me a 10-hour shirt, it doesn't make any sense. There's no such thing as 20-hour pants, 12-hour shirt, 10-hour shirt. What we said is that the size needs to be something that's easy to understand and relative. A lot of times we use t-shirt sizing, like you see here in the illustration. The guy in the back there is like, 10 hours, what is he talking about? It just doesn't make time to use that type of time for a size-based metric. So the truth is, it's easier for me to get the group of painters to agree that a specific wall is small in size or medium in size than it would be for me to get that same group of painters to agree on how long it would take to paint it. So studies have shown, and this came out in 2 different independent studies, that time-based estimates on average are about 17% accurate. So the goal here is going to be to try to get us from 17% accuracy to 85% or upward. So the first step you need to do is abandon time-based estimates. And I realize, once again, it's hard, but the truth is, whether you're building software, whether you're not building software, it doesn't matter what type of industry you're in. The truth is, there are known uncertainties. There are unknown uncertainties. There are things that people have different skill sets on when they go to build them. Whether it's software you're building or any other product or service, there's craftsmanship. And some people come in with years of experience and a whole banquet of tools they can use, a whole palette of tools, where others, don't have that experience, they're brand new, and they're going to take longer to do the same job. So I think the thought that's coming through to me is that we need to hyper-focus on size and focus less on time, because if we can get the sizing down, that's what's going to give us the ability to forecast. That's what's going to give us the ability to come out of the gate and have success in estimation. So that begs the next question. If that's true, then who's responsible for sizing and forecasting? Well, if we come out and say, the team should be the only one sizing ever, period. That's great, but it's not true. The truth is, when a product owner initially creates a backlog item, they should have some idea, some feel for the size of that item. Now, this doesn't need to be perfect. It's not rocket scientist. And I don't want the product owner to go off into an ivory tower, into a silo somewhere, and try to figure out how to do this independently on their own. In fact, I encourage them often to lean on a technical analyst or on someone who has the skills to help them do the estimation, so that they can get a better feel for what we're trying to do, for the work and what it comprises, and for how it is going to impact the estimates. So with that being said, the product owner should at least put an initial estimate on each card when it comes to sizing. After the product owner puts that initial estimate, of course, with the help of a technical analyst, it then becomes the team's responsibility to put a final size on the card, because they're the ones who are going to be doing the work. So because they're doing the work, we want to make sure that we're giving them an opportunity to get the final say as far as what they feel the size is. But the truth is, if you don't have a starting point, you don't have a point of comparison. So I think it's just critical for us to have a point of comparison where the product owner says it's small, the team says it's small. If both say it's small, chances are it's small. But if the product owner says it's small and the team says medium, well, it's close enough. The team's going to be doing the work. At this point, we can kind of run with medium. But usually if there's more deviation in that, I like to have a conversation about that at the release planning session. So it's one of these things where as you go through the sizing and estimation strategy, you're going to discover as you go that the further in you get, the more detailed or the more specific your estimates are going to be. So when you're initially given that estimate, that's when you're going to have the least knowledge and you're going to have the worst idea of what it is. But it's still important for the product owner to at least give it a shot, so that going forward, we can have a better understanding of exactly what was on the product owner's mind with regard to size and scope, and how does that compare to what the team says at release planning. So I use the example here of a weather forecast, right? We all know that the best job in the world is a meteorologist. You only have to be correct about 20% of the time to be an outstanding meteorologist, right? So most people, they don't rely on the weather anymore. They'll rely on weather apps instead of going to the TV. Because here's a guy right here, 20% chance of rain, 20% chance. Yeah, it's just storming, right? Living in Florida, we get those storms every day. So I can tell you there's generally 100% chance of rain on any rainy season day within an hour time frame. But, with that predictability, we need to find a way to make our teams more predictable than a weather forecaster, right? But not so in line with time that they're trying to get it exact. So now that we know who's responsible for it, how, right? This is the key. This is what pulls it all together. So the first thing you have to understand is what a story point is, what it was originally intended for, and how it should be leveraged or used. So for years, many have continued to try to associate a story point with either time or cost or the number of people to get the job done. I've seen this run a bunch of different ways. But I want you to think about it this way. So if somebody comes into the room, let's just call him the vice president of most important things, and he's there for your estimation meeting. And you going through the cards, and someone estimates a card, and they say, that's a 3. The first thing they'll say is, 3 what? So now the first thing that crosses their mind, of course, is $3, $300, $3 million, $300,000. It must be equal to money. When in actuality, no, it's not equal to money. Then it's okay. Is it 3 people? 3 people are going to be working on it. 3 people are going to do your job. Well, no, not exactly. Okay, well, if it doesn't have to do with cost and it doesn't have to do with money, then it must be 3 months, 3 hours, 3 weeks, 3 days. Anytime you throw out a number, the number automatically has to be associated with something. At least that's what we've learned over time. So in order to help organizations really try to get backed out of using time and get to something that's still specific and predictable, but not something that is going to hinder their ability to make forward progress, we often say, hey, let's just use a t-shirt size, right? Because we want to break that association between a point is equal to something. So the easiest example that I can give here is with a shoe size. So if I asked any of you, what size shoe do you wear? Let's just say hypothetically, one of the young ladies in the room says she wears a size 8 shoe or a 7 shoe. 7 doesn't mean that it took 7 days to make the shoe. 7 doesn't mean that the pair of shoes cost $14. 7 doesn't mean that 7 small children in a third world country, unless they're never mind. The point is, it doesn't mean any of those things. 7 is just a simple size. And the truth is, if I got a young lady 3 pair of size 7 shoes and lined them up next to each other and said, hey, try these on, they're all size 7. If you wear a size 7, you should all fit, right? The answer is not exactly, because shoes fit differently, even if they're the same exact size. Now, for guys, sometimes that may not be the case. We're pretty predictable when it comes to shoe size. It's pretty easy for us to get a shoe size. If we wear a size 10, you can buy just about any size 10 shoe and it should fit fine. But when it comes to ladies, when you buy a shoe, even if you buy the same size in 3 different styles or 3 different types, it's going to fit differently. So with that being the case, 7 is a relative size. It's not an exact size. There's no exact science to it. If you took 3 pair of size 7 shoes and broke out the ruler, they're not going to be exactly the same width. They're not going to have the same heel arch, the support, the length. I mean, all those things are going to be different. So the whole, no pun intended, point of a story point is to help us regulate that very thing. So if we can regulate and say that a story point allows us to have a number or a size, a t-shirt size, that associates later with a number that allows us to get a good understanding of what we're trying to do and how to size the work, it's going to be easy for me to forecast and figure out how many units a team can do versus how much time it's going to take to do any one specific thing, because we don't know that until the team member actually signs up and starts doing the work. So it may take Bobby, 22 hours to do. It might only take Jill 5 hours to do. So we want to make sure we have some balance there. We want to make sure we have good balance with regard to the story points and estimation. And I think that that's something that we often forget. So if we're looking at this from the perspective of points being points, and we're understanding that, then we can come in and say, how can we forecast now without using time? Because I mentioned that you can become predictable, right? So the quiz here, or the big $1 million question, is how do I leverage this then to become predictable in the forecast without using time? I love this the lady here, fortune teller. She says, here we rely on futures with no elements of time, only size, and I think that's great. And I think the thing that's most funny is She has a clock in the background, so she's totally using an element of time, but I digress. But it's not the same element of time that she's using the size with. And that's kind of the whole dichotomy here that we're trying to figure out. So if we consider story points and say story points are only a size and time is only time, we can figure out how many story points fit in a container. So the easiest way for me to get this back on track is to go back to our original paint crew that we were talking about earlier. If I had all those different painters with different skills, but they were all still part of one team, which is often the case, not everyone in every team has equal skills at everything that needs to be performed in a specific sprint or iteration. If I have that understanding that not everyone has the same skill set, not everyone has the same tools, not everyone has the same knowledge, then what I can do is I can say, okay, where one person might be weak this sprint, next sprint that person might be strong, depending on what we're working on. So if I can say that things are going to come out in the wash and there's going to be a balance over the course of 3 or 4 sprints, I can figure out how many units of work can be done. So if I use t-shirt size, for example, which is normally what we teach when we go in and coach, we say that an extra small equals 1, a small is 2, a medium is 3, a large is 5, and an extra large is 8. And what this does is it uses the Fibonacci scale on the small end to allow us to size stories or to size backlog items. Now, one of the conditions is we try hard not to size things that are giant like epics, because that's not a good portrayal or a good strategy to figure out how big or small work is. So we try to get things relatively small in size, and we try to use that sizing method so that we can tie it back to a number. Then once we have a number for those, we can figure out how many large walls can, so let's just say hypothetically, using the number scheme that I gave you, extra small is 1, small is 2, medium is 3, large is 5, and extra large is 8. If I said the team could do 20 units of work per sprint, that means if I put them in a sprint for 2 weeks, they could paint 20 extra small walls, or 10 small walls, or approximately 7 medium walls, 4 large walls, 1 narwhal. Well, they shouldn't be painting a narwhal. But the point is, it shouldn't matter, right? That this team, we can then be predictable and figure out, because wherever the junior painter starts, the senior painter is going to catch up with them at some point, and they're going to meet. And they're going to meet at one wall, and it's going to make everything connect. Now, that doesn't mean that, and I think the key here is, it doesn't mean that everybody's eventually going to move at the same pace. What it means is the slower painter may be painting slow to maintain a really good level of quality, so that the level of quality is no different between what the junior painter paints and the senior painter paints. It just takes the junior painter a little more time. And then over time, we may work on something totally different that has nothing to do with painting, where the senior painter is now the slowest, and a junior person says, hey, that's something I just covered in college. So maybe Joaquin just covered that in college, and that's something he's going to be very good at. Where Priscilla, may not know what's going on, and she might say, okay, next sprint, she might be the person who knows the most about it. So as long as you keep your teams consistent, what you're going to find is that over time, you're going to be able to figure out a pretty consistent velocity, a pretty consistent number of units that the team can do. And once you figure out what that velocity is over time, then you can use that to forecast out and see where teams are going to be. Now, the only rule that I throw out here is never, ever, ever, under any circumstance, ever, no matter what, ever, are we getting back together. Oh, wait, no, it's a Taylor Swift song. Hold on. Never, ever, ever, under any circumstance, ever, no matter what, ever, ever should we reverse engineer and try to lock down time to a point. So you should never say a point is a day, or a point is 6 hours or 8 hours, or a point is, you should never try to reverse engineer that. Because the second you reverse engineer it, what's going to happen is our natural psyche starts thinking in time again. So in order to create an environment of psychological safety and to remove time from the equation, we need to make sure that we're not going back to time. So we need to say, okay, this makes sense. Now that we have a good understanding that the teams can do this many units, and that's not associated with time, we can figure out in a 2-week window how much they can do. So back to the paint crew, to make sure we seal the deal. If you hired a paint team to come and paint the interior of your home, right? What they'll do is they'll come in and say, how many square feet is it? Do you want, what sheen do you want? What colors do you want? What color scheme do you want? And are there any anomalies we need to know about, right? And they won't go room to room. They'll pretty much just go in a couple of rooms, kind of get an idea of what it is. And then what they'll do is they'll give you an estimate and say, this job will be finished by Wednesday, and it'll cost this much. If they finish on Thursday you're not going to be responsible for paying anything extra. It's just something that they missed the deadline. If they finish on Tuesday, you're not going to get a rebate, even though they originally predicted that the room was going to be done by Wednesday. So with that being said, you need to have that kind of, hey, as long as the job is finished within the window, we're good. So to tie it all together, the team of painters represents the sprint team. The estimator represents the product owner who goes out to estimate the job. And the job represents a 2-week sprint. So if you look at the job as a 2-week sprint, the estimator as the product owner, and the team as a group of painters, then it makes a whole lot more sense when you go to sort through and figure out, because that person over time is going to get better at estimating the size of the jobs, and therefore they're going to become more predictable over time. And that's why painters exist, and they don't have a whole bunch of disparity in those estimates. So we had a question about estimate accuracy or discovery. How do we estimate discovery items or spikes if we don't use some time box? We're going to talk about those in just a few minutes. So I'm going to ask you to hold that thought, because that's coming. So hang in there. So right now we're talking about forecasting things and becoming predictable. Now, a lot of times people say, oh, but I've got to have some, buffer for interruptions or buffer time for different things. And for those of you who've ever learned from me before, you'll know that I'm not a huge fan of buffer time. In fact, I don't think buffer time is a good idea at all. So I often say, hey, let's figure out a different way to handle the debt, the technical debt. And for discovery or spikes, that's one thing. But for interruptions or for defects, that's a different thing. So we're going to talk about how to handle those separately. So for now, I just want to focus on not using time to get that initial estimate and to get that estimate moving. So now we have an understanding. So far, we understand why we should never use time to estimate. We understand who's responsible, that the product owner is responsible for initial sizing, and that the team's going to give subsequent estimates at release planning and at other times, and that the team's estimate's going to stand because they're doing the work. We understand what a story point is and how it's not related to time and how it can be useful because it's going to allow you to become predictable. And now we understand a little bit about how to use that story point to forecast without using time. So the next question is, how do I get to 85% accuracy? I mean, I threw out that number. That number seems sky high, and it is. I'll tell you right now, it's high, but there is a way to do it. But there are certain prerequisites that must happen in order for you to ever get close to 85% accuracy. So let's talk about a couple of those prerequisites right now. Number one, items need to be well written and small in size. You need to have a product owner that's practiced, that's seasoned, that knows what they're doing, or that leans on others for help in order to get to that point where they can get to be, 85% accurate. If you keep on estimating things that are giant in size, by the time you break those down, you're going to discover that they're not the size that you thought they were. So it's not that, if I have an item that is a small epic, that's 13 points. When you break that down, it might not even equal 13. It may be 22 points across 4 different stories. It's just we can't estimate. We can do an approximate size, but all the size means at larger than 8 is that it's an epic that needs to be broken down. So it's not giving us an accurate sizing. 2, the PO needs to lean on their analysts in order to provide assistance and clarity when creating the backlog items. So when a backlog item is created, it shouldn't just be the product owner alone in a room, rolling Dungeons and Dragons dice. Come on, guys, it's a 8, it's a 13. That shouldn't be the case. I want the product owner to lean on a business analyst and say, okay, tell me, how important is this to the consumer? Where does this kind of play in? I want them to lean on a functional analyst, someone who's internal to the organization, and say, hey, tell me strategically, where does this place us? Is this going to advance us in any way? Is it a really good idea? Is it something that's really critical that we get done now? Is it something that gives us a little buffer room? Third, you want to make sure you lean on a technical analyst so that the technical analyst can say, hey, that sizing doesn't sound right. You didn't take this into consideration. Or, hey, I think you're overestimating that. We already have this piece done. So you need to have all 3 in order for the product owner to provide a real good estimate. 3, teams need to have a rapid release planning session in order to benchmark a small and have multiple chances to validate their estimates together. The truth is, if you have a team that you have a product owner who does the initial estimate, You have supporting analysts who give a subsequent follow-up or confirmation of that estimate. Then you give the team 4 or 5 chances to review each other's estimates in a release planning session. And then you walk out of that release planning session, have a chance to review it and refinement, and then have a chance to do a final estimation adjustment at sprint planning. What you're going to quickly discover is that you have a ton of room for you to get those estimates right, that the estimates aren't going to be perfect when you start, but they're certainly going to get better over time. So lots of good stuff. And I appreciate all these people here in the chat who are helping with some of the questions. Looks like backlog item is what we're looking for there, and everybody got it. My apologies. If I use an acronym you're not sure about, go ahead and fire it away and we'll be happy to answer that question. So we want to make sure that you provide assistance and clarity when creating backlog items, right? But teams need to have this rapid release planning session in order to benchmark a small. What do I mean by that? If the teams that are working together, so this is good for scaling. So let's say for a moment that we have multiple teams that are working with a couple of different product owners. And let's just say they're working on a suite of products that all go together, but there's one product owner that kind of facilitates the backlog. What we want to do is we want to have the ability for the product owner to initially get a size on there, but we want to have the ability for the team to benchmark and say, okay, based on all this work, we feel like this item's a small. And they should revisit that small once a quarter. Now, if the teams are working together, they should do this in the same planning session. So whether it's big room planning or PI planning, which is product increment planning, or rapid release planning, no matter which one of the scaling methods you use, it's important for you to be able to get that size down. Because once teams agree on something that's small in size, if I say this wall is small in size to paint, what is this wall? The team can look at that wall and say, based on that one being small, we think that one's medium. I'm like, okay, well, what's this one? Oh, well, that one's definitely medium. Okay, what's this one? That one's extra large. So the more walls I throw into the mix, the easier it becomes for the team to size. So that's the concept behind rapid release planning, where we do a rapid fire estimation, where we can get to figure out what the sizes are. And then once we figure out what that benchmark size is, then we can expand from the benchmark and figure out what all the rest of the items should be based on that benchmark and compared to each other. And we'll go once every quarter and review that small benchmark to make sure it's still applicable, to make sure it still makes sense, so that we don't have, the same benchmark when we're working on completely different types of work. So this will give the team multiple chances to get it right. 4, the most important, you need to have a weekly backlog refinement session. Now, this is a short meeting between the team and the product owner. And basically, this is the product owner's opportunity to ask the team to do whatever they need for 1 hour per week. So maybe this sprint, the product owner needs the team to break down epics. Maybe next sprint, they need them to refine estimates. Maybe next sprint, they want them to break things down into tasks. It doesn't matter what they do each week, but each week the team will spend 1 hour with the product owner doing whatever the product owner needs to help facilitate the future of the backlog. What makes this so critical is it's another opportunity for the team to preview work, because generally what the product owner will do is they'll try to align work that team could be doing in the future in these weekly refinement or grooming sessions, so that you can have that work as a preview before the work actually comes into your sprint. So it's a great way for you to get your head around the work again, to kind of give it a preview, to see it, and to give it a little bit of a size before the work actually hits your queue. So once again, good practice, good idea. And then finally, time can never be used to estimate work. Did I say never again? Here we go. There are very few things in the entire Agile framework that I'm dogmatic about. This is one of them, because if the second we go back to time, it breaks the whole forecasting model. It takes away our ability to look at things objectively, and it takes away our ability to say, hey, this is going to be, this scope of work, and it's going to cover this many sprints. I'm okay with using time as a metric if you say that based on our estimations and release planning, so if we do a proper release planning session, we have 1,000 points. Let's just say we have 10 teams that are going to be working on this. So we have 10 teams that are going to be working, and each team is capable of doing 100 points a sprint. Impossible, right? I was hoping you'd say that. No team's going to do 100 points a sprint. Let's just say the teams can do 20 points a sprint. So if you have 10 teams that are doing 20 points a sprint, that becomes 200 points. If it's 1,000 points, it'll take those 10 teams 5 sprints to finish that. If we're doing 2-week sprints, that's 10 sprints. There you go. So the point I'm trying to make is you can figure out how many sprints it is. So 5 times 20 is 100, 100 into 1,000 is 10. There you go. It's just you can figure out how many sprints something's going to take, and that number is going to be really accurate, as opposed to figuring out how long each item's going to take and having disparity. So if you want to become predictable, the important piece is to make sure we remove time and give the team multiple chances to get the size right. Because the more chances they have to get the size right, the deeper they get into it, the less likely they're going to be to have those spikes and discovery and things like that. I mean, they will happen, but they won't happen as often, right? So we want to make sure our goal here is to help them not happen as often. So let's talk for a second about that initial estimate again, because I know I threw that out there and I kind of let it stand. So initial estimates are absolutely critical for estimation and forecasting accuracy. If not, you're going to get product owners that are going to be asking you for something, completely different than what your expectation is, what you need to build. So you got this guy here saying, that animal's a house cat. Nothing to be afraid of here. Look closer. And the other guy saying, oh, no, no, no. Based on my first look, here we have a young, dangerous tiger. Stay back and be careful. Sure, it's an orange cat, but it's not a tiger by any means, right? But I think it's just one of these things where maybe initially we might think it's one thing and the team may think it's something completely different. So it's important for us to get some direction between the team and the product owner to get everyone on the same page. So the part that most people, find interesting when we talk about this is that for as long as I can remember, so I'm going back in time here, for as long as I've been doing Agile, so I was certified by Ken Schwaber to be a Scrum trainer on September 8th of 2005, if that gives you an idea of how long I've been doing this. So since about that time frame, 2007, 2008, somewhere in that time frame, I've seen initial estimate in every tool that's been created. I've seen initial estimate as something that should be done, but I've never heard someone take the time to explain why an initial estimate is important. So the initial estimate is the estimate that's placed by the PO after they consult with a technical analyst to give an initial size for what they're trying to do. I know it sounds crazy because initial size, initial estimate, duh, but it's in order to gain clarity. One of the things that we discover is that when a team comes in and they don't have that initial estimate in place, or let's say for a second they don't have the initial estimate at all. When a team comes in and they give an estimate, a lot of times the product owner is concerned because they feel like the team could be bloating the estimate or making it much bigger than what it needs to be. When in actuality, that may not be what's happening. The team either doesn't have clarity of exactly what's being asked for, the item could be too large. There could be a lot of things that contribute to that feeling or to that sentiment. So you want to make certain that when you're going through and you're doing this, that you have some type of idea of what the initial estimate should be, right? And I think that if you have that initial estimate, that's going to give you at least something to bounce on. But sometimes we make the mistake of doing the initial estimate. So the product owner says, yeah, I'll give it an initial estimate. But then they broadcast what the initial estimate is. And this is where the problem came in. So the product owner would broadcast and say, I think it's medium. And the team, in order to not rock the boat, would say, well, if the product owner says it's medium, I guess it's medium. Or oftentimes they would say, oh, if the product owner says it's medium, then I automatically am going to say it's large because I'm going to bump it up a little bit because I don't want to get caught in a way that I'm unable to do the work. So they often buffer that way. So if you expose the initial estimate, a lot of times that causes the team more grief than if you had not exposed the initial estimate. So in some of the initial tools of the world, we're talking version 1 Rally, I'm talking pre-Jira here, you had tools that had a field labeled initial estimate. And the thing is, when you put the initial estimate in and you saved, the initial estimate would disappear. The only person that the initial estimate was viewable to was the product owner. And a lot of people didn't realize that or didn't understand it. So inside of their tools that they were using for Agile project management, they would delete that field out completely because they didn't understand the purpose or intent behind it. Now that you understand that initial estimate was there so that the product owner could give us some benchmark or some baseline for what they thought the estimate was without influencing us, and then we as a team could come back behind them and clarify the scope of what we're working on at release planning, it just made a whole lot more sense because now the two line up and we could say, okay, if the product owner said it was small, there must have been a reason they said it was small. If we think it's large and they think it's small, one of us is wrong. So this helps us to facilitate a conversation, right? Where before we didn't know where those conversations needed to be. So what do? We would often do things like planning poker, where we talk about every single card. Even if we were 100% certain, we would talk about every single card. And that would be incredibly time consuming. So we don't want to get to the point where we're talking about every single thing, because if you're talking about everything, there's going to be some things that you didn't need to spend the time talking about, where you could have optimized and spent that time talking about some of the things where there's greater disparity in size. So we reserve release planning in these initial estimates in order to get our head around the original scope of what's being asked versus the team's understanding of what they're expected to deliver, to make sure that those are somewhat in line. I'm not asking for perfection here. I'm just asking for either the same size or one column of difference if you're using t-shirt size. And what that's going to do is it's going to give you a running average over time, so that we can then say, okay, the product owner is going to become better at writing the items and sizing the items. The technical analyst is going to become better at consulting with the product owner. Now, be careful. When I say technical analyst, it doesn't mean you have to have someone with that title. A technical analyst could be a dev lead. It could be a lead developer. It could be an architect. It could be an enterprise architect, solutions architect. It doesn't matter who the individual is. It's someone who has close contact with the people who are doing the work, so that they can have a conversation about, we believe the scope to be this versus the product owner believes the scope to be B. Which is right, A or B? So that way we have the right conversation around the items where we have disparity. That's important, not just around every single item. We want to make sure we focus on items where there's disparity. So we had a question about, let's see, we have two actually. When you say items need to be well written, what does well written exactly mean? Well, we have a whole section. Good news. So on our account, if you go to LinkedIn, the AgileDad account, we have a section on SlideShare and talks about writing, well-written backlog items. And this is something that seems like it'd be a good webinar topic as well, because that's longer than a single sentence or a couple of sentence answer. But I think if you ask me for the top 3 components for a well-written backlog item, it would have a clear title and description, it would have clear acceptance criteria, and we'd have a clear understanding of the persona or target audience that this is going to address. And you may hear people who use the template as a who, I would like to do what, so that why. I'm not necessarily so fixated on a template as I am that you understand who the target audience is, that it could be easily consumable, and that the team as a group feels like they really have their head around what the work can be. Someone else asked, how do we determine how many points a team can do inside of a sprint? Is it based on historical data? If we have historical data, we can certainly use historical data. However, it's not always the most accurate. What we find is that as the scope of the work changes, sometimes if we're using historical data, the team's skill set may be different building a house than it is building a car, right? And I know those are two things you'd never build, but the work could be totally different. So sometimes you need to readdress that benchmark or that baseline. And if you consistently readdress the baseline or benchmark for small, what will happen is over time, the team will become predictable, because you'll be able to figure out how many units of work they could do. So one piece of advice there that I use is I will use this initiative to help determine. So if I'm going in and I'm trying to figure out, how many points a team can do, I might take the last 3 sprints of work after they're finished working on it, get them to t-shirt size it, and use a comparative chart to show them how long it took versus what the t-shirt size was. So that way they can get their head around why I'm trying to use size instead of using time. And I found that that's quite effective. So that works really, really well. Another question came in about a link for the well-written backlog. That can be found on our LinkedIn. So if you go to AgileDad LinkedIn, there's a whole bunch of slide decks there that are available. It's also available on the AgileDad website. And it's about writing strong backlog items or becoming a powerful product owner. There's 2 sessions that both cover the same topic. There's also one, so I'm going to give you a tip here. There's one that's a secret one that you can get to. So here we go. So everyone pay attention. I'm giving you secret advice here. If you go to the AgileDad website under downloads, there's a section called conferences. And if you go to the conferences section and you click on that, it's going to ask you for your first name and your email, or your name and your email. Now, it's not adding you to a subscription list. We're just trying to count the number of unique downloads that each conference gets. In a recent conference, we did a topic called the top 5 Agile secrets that every company is doing that you don't know, things that are helping you be better. And one of those secrets is about writing good, strong backlog items, and it covers that topic. So that may be another good way for you to get that topic. So let's see. Okay, so going back to the 2-week sprint, how many points are we going to fit? Good question. So if we're talking about 2-week sprints, it's not going to be an initial hey, we're going to start with this. So let's just pretend for a second the teams never worked together before. So if the teams never worked together before, oftentimes I'll tell everyone in positions of authority that I'm going to start the team with just 10 units, 10 points. And everybody says, well, that's low. And I'm like, exactly, because I want them to finish those and then come to me and say, hey, we finished. What do you want us to work on next? And then what you'll see is over the course of 2 or 3 sprints that you'll see their velocity slowly increase. But then what you'll see is you'll see it kind of table out. You'll see a plateau. And that's kind of when you have your head around what the velocity is. But you often want to do an extra sprint or two just to make sure you've got it. So there's a lot of opportunity there to make sure that you're in the right place and that you understand. And then you can use that to forecast future sprints, at least for that quarter. And then next quarter, you just revisit to make sure you have the same benchmark. And that'll keep the team's velocity consistent. One key there is you want to keep the team consistent to keep the team's velocity consistent. So if you find you're in a position where you're constantly rotating team members in and out, you may not have an opportunity for you to get consistent velocity. You need to keep those teams consistent and let them swarm to work, as opposed to constantly pushing people on or off teams to go back and try to figure that out. So so that brings us to resizing. So should we resize work as we make discovery? Great question. And this is the point of someone asked about spikes, someone asked about those kind of things. This is the discovery piece. So here's what we've learned, right? Up until the work enters a working sprint, it's perfectly fine for you to go in and resize, adjust story point estimates. But once the work's in motion, the estimate for the story and story points should be locked. You shouldn't change it based on spikes or initiatives or things that come in. And the reason why is if you have to create a spike, I'm all for that. I think it's a great idea. Oh no, we didn't think of this. Let's go in and let's create a spike. What that does is it sets an alert, one, that the product owner needs to do a better job of vetting out and doing acceptance criteria and things of that nature so that we can better understand the stories as an input that are coming into the sprint. And two, it teaches the team the importance of accountability and making sure that they understand the scope of the work before they start. Now, that's not to say that a spike's never going to come up, but if it does, I do want it to interrupt. I do want it to appear as an interruption. And the reason why I want that is so that everyone in the organization knows, hey, something happened, right? There's an anomaly here. Because if we don't treat the spike as an anomaly, what ends up happening is everything just looks flat and consistent, like everything was fine. And we end up swapping things out and saying, hey, because this happened, we're going to take this out, or I want to trade this for this. And I want to get out of that habit. I don't like trading things out of a sprint. If a team is, I have no problem with taking things out of a sprint if a team hasn't started on it. So let's say for a second, this will be a good working example. Let's say for a second that we're in the middle of a sprint, things are good, and then we just received information about something very hot that we need to work on right away. So we got this new hot request, something we have to work on now. If you don't get this fixed right away, we're going to lose our biggest customer, Chicken Little syndrome, fire alarm model, call it what you will, right? So what do? If we tried to trade that out for something that was currently in the sprint, that would be unfair to the team because the team hasn't had an opportunity to vet out that work and they haven't committed to that particular backlog item. They've committed to other work that's currently in the sprint. So if there's an item in a sprint that the team has not touched, and that it's going to take multiple people on the team to address that item, the new item that came in, it's perfectly legal for you to take an item that has not been touched and pull it out of the sprint. A natural byproduct of doing that is that the team will finish early. And when a team finishes a sprint early, they'll say, hey, what do you want us to work on next? And the product owner can say, go grab the top item, which is the new item that was going to be put into the sprint. And what will happen is they're still going to address that item to the best of their ability, but it's not going to be part of their original time box commitment. And the purpose behind that is we don't want the team to feel like that we're switching out something that was part of their original commitment with something that they had no idea about. So you want to make sure that you've got a solid set of work that the team can commit to, but you also want to make sure that that work isn't changed intermittently. Now, if they make discovery and they discover something inside of the sprint, it's their responsibility to bring to the product owner's attention and say, hey, this is something that we discovered. What do you want us to do? Because what I found is sometimes the product owner will say, hey, yeah, don't worry about that. We'll include a new backlog item next sprint to make sure we do that. Other times they'll say, oh man, I didn't even think of that. Yeah, let's get that in there. And it'll allow you to create a spike as a disciplined way to keep track of, hey, something happened. There was an anomaly and we need to address it, as opposed to, hey, everything's fine. Because the one thing that we want to prevent here, and this is critically important because I know there's a lot of leaders and executives on the call. By the way, I appreciate you being here. One of the things that we want to prevent is making it look like everything's just a smooth line for the leadership, when in actuality, there's been new things that are introduced, there are things that happened. I want to make it look as real as possible as far as metrics are concerned. So that way they can see how often these unpredictable things happen, how often events happen that come into the sprint. So we need to make sure that we're addressing things that are predictable. The point here is we want to make sure that there's a clear understanding that when items are estimated, right, in any phase, the initial estimate comes from the product owner with the help of a team lead or whoever that might be, a tech lead. Subsequently, every other estimate from that point forward comes directly from the teams. There should not be a representative who represents the entire team because that's flawed. There should not be management or leaders that represent the team. That's also flawed. What we're trying to do here is we want to make sure that the team has the ability to go in and do subsequent estimation together on the work that they're going to be working on. So it's critical to know that at no point should you have someone representing the team doing the full-blown estimate. The only time someone representing the team even participates is in the example of the technical analyst that I gave, where they're assisting the product owner with understanding the scope of the work so that the product owner can put an initial estimate on the size of an item. Outside of that, there's never anyone representing a team or doing this on their behalf. The team is responsible for estimating their work because the team is the people who are going to be doing the work. So that's critically important. So here we had another acronym somebody discovered on a slide. So I'll just go through it real quick. It says, up until the work enters the sprint, it's perfectly fine to resize the work. Once work's in motion, the estimate should remain locked. This is to afford greater predictability to leadership, which is what we want. It helps the teams have a greater understanding of the importance for accurate sizing. Frequent resizing causes great confusion and breaks all models of predictability. This also causes separation from a benchmark revealed at rapid release planning and leads to estimation deviation at the team level. And I use RRP here because in a previous slide, I used rapid release planning. So I thought we'd put the two together. So I just want to make sure we got the acronym down there. Okay. So I'm excited. This is good. So we only have 2 more topics to cover. It looks like we're going to hit right at an hour. So this time box is perfect, right? When does the estimate stand? And I love my little friend here. It's kind of like the situation, except for this is the estimate, right? I know. Cheesy joke. All the dad jokes are free, right? We said that before. So let's talk about the estimate real quick. So the estimate has 3 points where it's considered a standing estimate. So first point, at the backlog item creation workshop. So at the backlog item creation workshop, the product owner estimate stands. So even if the technical analyst comes in and says, that's way bigger than you think it is, the product owner estimate stands at that creation workshop because they're creating the item and they're the ones who have the best understanding of the scope. They're the ones who have the best opportunity or the best chance to get the estimate correct. And that's, of course, with the assistance of a technical analyst. That's the TA. 2, the team estimate stands at rapid release planning. They're doing the work, right? So after they have a discussion with the product owner, if there's any items with disparity, I think it's important for us to know, hey, the team's doing the work. They're the ones who are going to be pressing forward. We need to make certain that they have a clear understanding of what the estimate is and that their decision is the one that we're going to run with after release planning with regard to the size of the item, knowing that we still have chances in refinement to change it and again in sprint planning. And of course, 3 is the team estimate is final at the conclusion of sprint planning because that's when the work goes into motion. So this gives the team so many chances to get the estimate right and to lock it in. And I think that's critical because if you give the team multiple chances to get the size estimate right, they can usually get their head around that and come to agreement as opposed to trying to figure out how long something is, because then every time something new is discovered, it changes the scope of time. So where the size may not change, the time could change. So this is the whole purpose of pulling time out. We want to make sure that we're getting things sized correctly and using size as our metric, because then we can figure out how many of something of a size can be accomplished in a specific amount of time. So let's see, somebody else asked here. Aha, good. No, we were just clarifying rapid release planning again. Excellent. Wanted to make sure that's good. Okay. So we do have a couple more questions. So let's get those real quick. What about estimating planned discovery items that'll help us technically understand a future epic? So if you're doing discovery items that are planned, either A, we should try to do that inside of our 1 hour session for refinement, or B, we should add that as a backlog item that goes into a sprint. And it's the product owner's discretion to say, I'll dedicate this many points towards discovery. And if they want to put time boxes around discovery, I am for that. So if they say, I don't want to invest more than 3 hours of discovery or 5 hours of discovery, I'm fine with that. And you can still put a point on it. It's just the point doesn't equal the time. It's just, this is how big of an effort this is, or this is how big they want it to be. But they just happen to put a time box on it saying, don't spend more than this amount of time, because I don't want to get to that point, right? I don't want to associate points with time. Let's see. So if a user story in an active sprint is no longer accurate to its sizing due to new discoveries made by a developer, should it not reflect the accurate size the developer created? Okay, so this is what we're talking about before. The developer in this case should go back to the product owner and say, hey, as written, this story is this size, but with the new discoveries we've made, these extra things are going to have to take place that weren't accounted for. Do you want to add those in as a subsequent story in the next sprint, or is it critical that this is being done in this sprint? And how do you want to address that? This is something that should come up either at a daily stand-up or in a conversation with the product owner to make sure that we have that coverage. So we want to make sure that we're having the conversations in a timely manner so that we know how to address that discovery. I'm not saying that the developer's discovery shouldn't be accounted for. I'm saying we need to have an agreement as part of the team agreement, whether the product owner is going to create a new backlog item to cover the pieces that weren't there as part of discovery, or if they want you to insert that work, knowing that there are other items in the sprint that are at risk of not being completed, knowing if you finish that work, that, hey, the new discovery added this amount of work, we may not finish A, B, C, or X, Y, Z. That's the product owner's discretion to make the call. If you see you're going back to a time box and estimate needs to go back to time, so I'm having a hard time sticking with points, okay? How can you do that in still 2 weeks? So a lot of people get hung up on 2 weeks is an estimate of time. What I want you to think of for a moment is separate time again. 2 weeks is just the size of a job, right? Just like size 8 is the size of a shoe, or size 9 is the size of a shoe, 2 weeks or 3 weeks or 1 week is the size of a job. With the exception of teams who are doing Kanban or continuous delivery, where they're just getting things through on a first in, first out basis, and everything has to be small in a Kanban world. One of the rules of Kanban is you have to get everything small in size. If everything's consistently sized, then you're good to go. Then you just track your throughput, your variance, and your cycle time, right? And you're doing Kanban and you're good to go. You limit your work in progress and focus on outcome. You're rolling right along. I think the key here, though, is anytime we throw a number out, whether it's a number of weeks or whether it's a number of points, people come back and they try to associate it somehow with time because the sprint length is 2 weeks. But what did I just now say? Sprint length. Length is not measured in time. I know it's kind of confusing, but you have to get your head around the fact that the more you separate time, the more you pull time out, the better it's going to be. So we had a question about the difference between PI and rapid release planning. So PI is product increment planning, and that's used in SAFe. And SAFe is, once again, one of the scaled frameworks. Rapid release planning sort of replaces a lot of the PI initiative in SAFe. I'm not saying one's right and one's wrong, but rapid release planning was invented back in 2009. So it's been around a little bit longer, and 40 of the Fortune 100 companies are currently using it. So it's just one of these things where you don't have to get the whole enchilada in order to get that one piece. So I think that organizations who maybe aren't prepared to take on all the things that SAFe prescribes, but they still want to have greater predictability, can leverage rapid release planning to get the predictability without taking on everything that SAFe encompasses. So it's just one of the tools that you can use, and it's completely free. There's no certification necessary or test to do it. It's just something that AgileDad created that's completely free for you. It's something that I invented many years ago, and it's something that I feel like everyone can benefit from. So I want to make sure that you've got that nailed. There we go. So just wanted to get your head around that and food for thought. And I appreciate the feedback here. So we're going to have a section for final answers or questions here at the end, but I want to make sure we get to the last piece. So with that being said, we covered that. We said 3 points where the estimate stands. 1, at the backlog item creation for the product owner. 2, the team's estimate stands at rapid release planning. And 3, the team's estimate is final at sprint planning. the crux of the whole situation right here. How do we explain this to leadership? How do we get them to buy in and understand? Sometimes I gotta say, it sounds something like this. Now, keep in mind, I've been a CEO, CIO, and CTO of 3 different companies, EIO. I've earned all my letters. So with that being said, dude, this is radical, man. We just hang loose through the estimation process, and things will just go great, man. We'll just get it all right, And I think that sometimes leaders feel like this is so eccentric and so out there. It's almost like you're saying the opposite of no estimate movement, but you're not saying you want strict time-based estimates either. So what I found to be most effective is to try to use examples to show how ineffective time-based estimates really are. And you could do something as simple as how long will it take to walk from this end of the building to the other end of the building. Let them take a few steps and stop them and say, now how long do you think it'll take? So far it took you this much time. And what'll happen is they'll see that as they get closer advancing, that they'll discover that, hey, their estimate time base was way off if it's not something that they've timed themselves doing. Use the shoe size reference that I used earlier, the painting reference. Those are all really good references to help you figure it out. I think the key here is this. And if there's one reason for leadership to attend, this would be it. And for all you leaders who are watching, if you didn't focus at any other point, please focus now, because this is critical. Leadership is trusting you because they need the utmost confidence in the way that we size and that our estimates are right. And they're using that to forecast upcoming work, right? So it's critical for us to understand that size is critical for them to forecast, but it's critical for us to treat it with that kind of respect, because leadership needs to understand that size is a more accurate prediction than time. And if they can get their head around that piece, all of a sudden they can relax and just focus on the outcome of what's being delivered, as opposed to the output or how long it's going to take or what their expectations are. So I want to make sure I cover the key takeaways real quick, and then I'm going to open up for Q&A. So agile estimation and forecasting accuracy hinges on our solid understanding of how story points work. You need to understand how story points work in order to be able to estimate and forecast. Story point estimates should never, here we are again, be associated with time. Points are an estimate of size and should be treated as a size-based estimation. Leadership wants the ability to be predictable at the product backlog item level, so that they can forecast out for releases, for subsequent projects. So they want that capability, and we need to take that in mind. Estimation accuracy takes work. It's not an all or nothing initiative. You can try things like rapid release planning, make small changes to your daily stand-up and other times to help your estimates become more accurate. When we focus on outcome instead of output and limit our WIP, and WIP stands for work in progress, we'll naturally become better at estimating, become more predictable. And finally, we have lots of information at AgileDad.com that we encourage you to visit and look at. So I'm going to close this out for those who have to go at the hour, and then I'm going to stick around for Q&A for those who have questions. So on behalf of my clan, I want to say thank you. This is awesome. This was from a recent trip to Australia. You see me featured there in the middle with my 2 sons, my 2 daughters, my beautiful wife there. It's a great opportunity for us. And I like to leave with an inspirational thought. So I'm going to give you this thought, and then I'm going to answer the question. So here's your thought. In these days of uncertainty, where there's lots of pressure and radicalism and pandemics and rioting and all kinds of craziness going on, it's important for us to look at life through a different lens, right? And one of the things that I teach over and over again is it's time for us to come together as a people and to stop being judgmental about others based on what they know, who they love, who they worship, where they worship, size, color. None of that should matter. If the world was filled with people who didn't have these lenses, the world would be a better place. And we need to just fill the world with love. If we flood the world with love, it's going to help everyone come together. It's going to help everyone be amazing. So my challenge for you is to find a way to apply this, not just at work, but at home, so that you can help uplift someone else and serve someone else. Because those who lose themselves in the service of others are the people who become greater at the end of life. So it'll help you become independently wealthy in spirit and in soul. And it could help financially too. So let's hit a couple of these questions, because I saw some pop in. So lots of good stuff here. Let's see. We have a whole big thread here on Kanban. I'm going to address that one offline if that's okay. Let's see. Where does the Scrum Master fit in all of this? So the Scrum Master is responsible for helping make sure that the teams aren't pressured to use time-based estimates, or that leadership understands the difference between time-based and story point estimation. So the Scrum Master becomes the conduit of conversation and makes sure that we have good conversation points between the team and the leadership and between the product owner and the team. So that way we have everyone on the same page. Good question. Should bugs be estimated? In my world, there's a difference between an interruption and a defect. So I want to be careful here. So a defect is something that, as a result of something that we built, that was approved, that was released, something else has broken and it's something else that we need to address in the next sprint. In that case, yes, I estimate it. But if it's something that in the middle of a sprint, we get an interruption saying, hey, the sky is falling, we need to fix this, we should have a different way to address those interruptions that helps us prevent them from becoming defects in the future. And that's a completely different topic called Team John, and that's coming up in one of the future webinars. That's so timely that you ask. How do you use story points when a single backlog is worked on by multiple teams? This is where you use an epic. So if you use an epic and you just story point the epic, break it down into 2 smaller stories, insert the stories into sprints, and keep the epic outside of the sprint, the 2 stories will roll up to the epic for forecasting purposes for the leader, but each team will be able to estimate the stories and story points, and thereby it'll just seal the deal there. Do we add story points for a spike? We discussed that earlier. If the team brings in a spike, should it be given an effort or a time box or something else entirely? This is one of those things where you can do it as a time box. I definitely want to put a box around how long they spend addressing a spike, but I don't want the time box to be associated with points. So you got to be careful there. How much information, what type of information is needed for a good story point estimate? Title, description, solid acceptance criteria, and a clear understanding of the persona that it's being built for. So there's lots and lots of good information there. How do you overcome a budget estimate of traditional projects? I don't. So what I do is I use the budget and the team's cost, the cost for a function of the team, and I'll forecast out and say, if I have a budget of this much money and it's this much operating cost for the team for this amount of time, I'll use that to forecast out and say, this is how much of the team's time I have to dedicate towards this project. And of course, you can subtract out, if you're in leadership, profitability and things that you want to earn from the top. So that way you can forecast and get things, kind of locked in there. Another question, how can you convince your C-suite that swapping work items out once the team's in the middle of a sprint when a hot item comes in is not a good idea? Okay, so this is one of those things that you have to make sure you have a way to address the hot items that come in. If you have something set up that's a Team John, where they can initially address these items and make a determination whether it's something that warrants disrupting a sprint or something that doesn't warrant disrupting a sprint, then it gives you some credibility over time to be able to do it. But you can't just say the squeaky wheel gets the grease in this case, which is what you're saying there in the other piece. We need to make sure we're addressing this holistically so that everyone has a chance for their voice to be heard, but at the same time, we're realistically approaching work and not constantly swapping out work, because that's a pandemic there on its own. I know we're not setting time-based estimates, but how do we handle external client requests for specific targeted dates? So they can request. So I think this is another symptom that's being mentioned here. The symptom is that you're allowing the stakeholders to feel like they're product owners. There needs to be a product owner who handles these incoming requests and says, hey, this is great, these external client requests, but this is when it can be facilitated in this sprint. This is the soonest we can get it in. And they need to be having those conversations. So this is a symptom, in my opinion, of maybe not having the strongest product owner. You need someone who's going to have, the ability to really dig in and be able to, power those questions through and power that opinion through to the stakeholders and say, hey, I am the product owner and I'm going to make the final decision. It may not always go over well, but even if your work is being driven by external client requests, you need to make sure they can request a date, but it's not always going to fall into that date range. And then as you start addressing work off the queue, you can start to get more predictable with when that work's going to fall. When I said the PO should give an initial estimate, do you mean estimate epics or stories? Stories, not epics. I never estimate epics. I'll just say it's a small epic, medium epic, or large epic. I hardly ever estimate epics. I only estimate epics if I'm forced to, and I'll just use high story point values, 13, 20, 40, 100. How much weight complexity should have on a size, and how do you measure it? So I do a triangulation where we talk about the importance to the end consumer. So that's one, must have, should have, could have, or would like. The priority, which is high, medium, or low based on urgency. And then the size of the item using t-shirt size. And I'll use a trifecta there and get a triangle out of it. And then I do some leverage, some pointed leverage. So I use an algorithm. And complexity is actually the third. It's tertiary. So the primary is on urgency to consumer, secondary is on urgency to the company, and tertiary is on size. So there you go. I think we've just answered all the questions. I want to say I appreciate all of you being here. It's been amazing spending some time with you today. As always, if you have any other questions, concerns, or anything that AgileDad can do for you, feel free to give us a holler. We'd love to help you at learnmore@agiledad.com or 866-410-1616. On behalf of the entire team at AgileDad, keep being awesome. Stay agile, my friends. And as always, take care. Till next time, goodbye.